Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you. Welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the relatively recently solved cold case, and this was the murder of 24-year-old Lori Slesinski. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. So now, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that somehow I had never heard of before, and it had never been recommended to me. I went back through my list. I searched her name. I searched her murderer's name, and neither name came up. But I was very surprised that this isn't one that more people wanted to hear about or discuss, because it's absolutely crazy. And I feel like it's the type of case that opens the many doors, all the doors, to lots of questions. So basically what happened here, for the Cliffiest Notes version of the Cliffiest Notes, Lori Slesinski went missing in 2006. And right away, police were pretty sure they knew who was responsible, because the person they had in mind was somebody who was the last person to see her, was reportedly obsessed with her, and had a history of murdering 2 people when he was just 12 years old. Okay, but they did not have enough evidence at that time back in 2006 to convict him, so the case went cold. It stayed cold a while before eventually it heated up again, and in a real way. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I'm going to ask you the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once we have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. I actually have 2. 1, what do you believe happened to Lori Slesinski the day that she went missing? Like, what led up to whatever ended up making it so that she's no longer here with us today? And 2, do you believe that the person who ended up being arrested was responsible? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. So with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the disappearance and believed murder of 24-year-old Lori Slesinski. Our case today begins on Saturday, June 10th, 2006, and we are in Auburn, Alabama. It's on this day that Lori Slesinski disappeared, and to this day, she has never been seen again, and her body has never been recovered. So it was on this evening that Lori had plans to have, like a girls' night with a friend of hers. It was going to be very much like a fuck guys, I just want to dance type of night, but also not that type of night at all, because they weren't going to be going out. Lori was going to be going to her friend Lindsay's house, and they were going to be staying in, watching a movie, having drinks, talking, just having a very chill night with just the goys, just her and her best friend. So Lori called Lindsay that evening at about 6:30 p.m. and she's like, okay, this is what's going on. I'm about to leave the house. I'm going to run to the store. I'm going to get some stuff for us tonight, drink mixes, all that jazz. And then I'm going to head to your house. And everything was fine. It was totally cool. It was a totally normal conversation. Then, about 30 minutes later, Lori had not shown up, but Lindsay's phone rang and she could see that the call was coming from Lori's phone. So she picks it up. She's like, hello, but she gets no response. And then eventually the line just goes dead. And she thinks, like, that's kind of weird, tries calling her back, doesn't get any answer, and doesn't think much of it. But then time marched on. Minutes went by. She didn't show up. Hours went by, and Lori didn't show up. And this was unusual. It was not like Lori to, have plans to be somewhere and not show up. And it definitely wasn't like Lori to have plans, not show up, and not call with a reason. So at this point, Lindsay's like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. So she calls Lori on her cell phone. No answer. She calls Lori on her landline. No answer. She calls a friend of Lori's who she knew had been with Lori that evening before, they had their phone call, all that jazz, and they had not seen her. Now, instead of worrying, Lindsay tried to rationalize the situation. She's like, okay, something must have come up. She must be doing something else. I guess a friend of theirs, a mutual friend, had recently had a baby. So she's like, maybe she went and saw this friend and this cute little baby, or maybe it's something else altogether. But Lizzie went to bed that night just trying to put the fact that Lori didn't show up out of her mind. But then it was the next day. It was Sunday. And that day, Lori and Lindsay also had plans. They were going to go to the pool together. And again, she doesn't hear from and doesn't see Lori. And she's like, what the heck? This is very odd. So she calls her again over and over. And she's leaving voicemails. She's leaving messages on Lori's answering machine. and she's not getting a call back. So she's like, okay, then I don't know like what's going on, but I guess I'm not going to hear from her this weekend. I guess we're not hanging out. And she's like, I'll just see her tomorrow, Monday, at work, because Lorie and Lindsay both worked at the same mental health care facility. But then it's Monday. It's Monday morning, and Lorie doesn't even show up for work. From there, things moved relatively quickly, with people going over to Lorie's home to check on her and seeing that something was definitely wrong. Lorie's mother filing a missing persons report that wasn't taken seriously enough, as we often see. But it didn't take long for things to be taken seriously, because the day after the missing persons report was filed. We'll see why I said fired. Lorie's car was found engulfed in flames not far from her home. Now, luckily for those that loved Lorie, she was not in her car at the time that it was set on fire. But finding her car in this way definitely took things from a missing persons case to something a bit more serious. But despite all their efforts in investigating the case, it would take 16 years for Lorie's family to even get partial resolution. So let's now talk about Lorie and then talk about how we got here. Lorie Ann Slesinski was the second of 2 children, her and her older brother Paul being born to parents Arlene and Casey, and Lorie was born on September 21st, 1981. Lorie's family, which was Arlene, the mom, Casey, the father, and Paul, the brother, were actually initially from New York State, but they moved to Alabama when Lorie was just 13 years old, and despite being in an age where that could be like a problem from what I've heard, I don't know a lot of 13-year-olds, but I've heard that they can be opinionated. Lorie did really well with the move. She was happy about all the open space they had, because open space meant she could have lots of animals, and she was one of those kids that just like loved animals. Lorie's mother said that Lorie was just like a good person, a kind person, a loving person. She loved sports, loved, walking, riding bikes, movies, video games. She loved her dog Peanut, because again, she loved animals, and Peanut was her little guy, and she loved her family, and she was like exactly the type of daughter you'd want, the type you would be proud of. Her mother said like she was very studious. She did really well in school. She graduated high school and then decided herself to go on to higher education. When Lorie left home and enrolled in Auburn University, her parents were like a little nervous to have her leave, but they wanted to make sure she was set up for success. So they bought her a mobile home, this little, a home of the mobile variety. Okay. And it was parked in this cute little manicured trailer park, I guess is what they're called. And it was a place that a lot of local students that went to Auburn University would live as well. Arlene said she did have a hard time letting Lorie go off to school, because that was her baby, right? She had 2 kids. This was her baby, and this was her girl that she was going to be going off to school and living on her own. And she said that when Lorie went off to school, she was so nervous and missed her so much that she would call her every day until Lorie was finally like, listen, you gotta not do this, Mom. You gotta let me live my life. And from there, they didn't talk every day, but they talked pretty often, every other day, and very consistently. While in school, Lorie did really well. She majored in psychology, minored in criminal justice, and graduated with honors. And she was so over the moon and happy to finally be finished with school, though she did have plans to go back to school and get a master's in psychology. But for now, she was just happy to be done, and even happier when her and her best friend Lindsay got hired at the same mental health facility, the East Alabama Mental Health Center, which was Lorie's first real job after, going to school for. This was the first job in the field that she had gone to school for. It was really cool for Lorie that her and Lindsay could work together, because they had become pretty good friends. They become pretty close when they met in school. They met during their junior year. And Lindsay said from the moment she met Lorie, she knew she wanted to know her. She was just warm and friendly and inviting, and there was a sort of magnetism there. So they were kind of close in school, but really got closer once they graduated and went on to work together. And because they were, close, real buds, spent a lot of time together, it was especially weird when Lorie didn't show up for their scheduled girls' night. Okay, so you remember how I said they were supposed to hang out Saturday, she didn't show up, they were supposed to hang out Sunday, Lorie didn't show up, right? And Monday, she didn't show up for work. I can't say for sure why nothing was done Monday, because it seems like at that point alarm bells would be going off really hard. But for whatever reason, I wasn't there. I can't say why. Nothing was done, or at least nothing was reported to have been done on Monday. Nothing was said to have happened, the ball wasn't said to start rolling on this missing person situation until Tuesday. So again, Tuesday rolls around. Lorie doesn't show up. And this is the second day that she hasn't shown up for work. And it wasn't like she called. She just did a no call, no show 2 days in a row. And that was strange. So finally, Lindsay goes to the supervisor at this mental health facility and is like, hey, This is what's going on, and I am concerned. And it's at this point that the supervisor is like, okay, how about this? How about you go? You go and you go. Go to Lori's house. Take Thaddeus, some guy that worked with them. He's like, you two go and see what's going on. See if Lori's okay. Check out her place. It's about 10 a.m. that Tuesday when Lindsay and Thaddeus pull up to Lori's trailer. They go to the door. They knock on the door. They get no answer. So they try to open the door and they find that it is unlocked. And that's already immediately weird because it's just not something Lorie would do. But once the door was opened, that's when Lindsay said she knew something was terribly wrong because her home, Lori's home, was in a condition that she just simply would not have left it. Inside the home, the very first thing that Lindsay noticed was that it was absolutely freezing. Apparently the air conditioner was on and it was like blasting air through that place. And that was something that Lorie just wouldn't have done. She was like one of those girls that was easily cold. I feel like we all know that girl that's just cold when it's like 70 degrees. I'm like, can't relate because I'm insulated, right? But it's cold. And she wouldn't normally do that because she was the type of person who was often cold. And also because like she wasn't even home to reap the benefits of said air conditioning. And we all know electricity is not cheap. Okay. But the second thing she notices is that Lori's dog Peanut is left in a crate by himself. I actually don't know the gender of this dog Peanut, but the name Peanut lends in my mind to a little boy dog. But Peanut, the dog, is in a crate by themselves. Now, the very first thing Lindsay did as an animal lover herself was let Peanut out of the cage because, like, spread your little wings and fly, angel. Fly, little Sebastian, right? But once Peanut was out of the cage, that's when Lindsay was like, this is kind of weird because Peanut seemed cared for. Despite the fact that Lorie was thought to have been missing for days at this point, Peanut's crate was clean. He looked like he had been fed, like he was happy. He wasn't seemingly neglected. And that was weird because that would have meant that somebody was there taking care of him while he was in this crate. And all of this was especially odd because though Peanut was cared for, and that is something that's, good, Lorie just wouldn't have left Peanut. She wasn't the type, this dog went everywhere with her, you know what I mean? So she wouldn't have left this place and left Peanut to be cared for by somebody else keeping him in a crate. That just wasn't something that Lorie would do. So all of that is happening over at Lori's trailer. But meanwhile, Lori's mother, Arlene, is at work where she works as a nurse for, I believe, elderly patients, okay? And she gets a call while she's at work from, I believe it was Lori's boss. It was reported as a coworker, but I'm pretty sure it was like her supervisor. And she calls Arlene, or they call Arlene rather. I don't know their gender either. They call Arlene and they tell Arlene like, hey, Lorie hasn't been to work in 2 days. And immediately alarm bells are going off in Arlene's head because she sits there and she thinks to herself, oh, you know what? I haven't actually talked to Lorie since Thursday. And she's like, oh shit. Immediately, Arlene leaves and she heads towards Auburn so she can check on her daughter. On the way, she calls her husband, Casey, tells him what's going on, tries to call Lorie multiple times, but gets no answer. So she calls Auburn police on the way to have an officer be at the trailer to meet her so that she can report her daughter missing. So Lee Hodge was a police officer who worked for the APD, which is the Auburn Police Department. I'll probably go back and forth calling it both of those things throughout this video because I can't stick to one thing, but he worked there from 1980 to 2008, I believe, when he ended up retiring. And he was working on June 13th, 2006, when the call came in to report, Lori Slesinski missing. After receiving the call, he went to Lori's mobile home, which was located at the Ridgewood Trailer Park, where he was met by Lori's friends and family, like her mother, obviously. Now, when he took in the scene, he noticed some things that were setting off alarm bells in his head right away. He noticed that Lori's door looked damaged. It looked like it could have been forced open. It was like a little bit broken and it was splintered. And he also noted that there was a strip plate that should have been at the bottom of the door and that was gone. And I don't know what a strip plate is, but he did and he noted it. And he noted that all the damage to the door looked to be fresh. Inside the home, he also saw what he believed to be signs of a struggle. The answering machine cord that would have, made it so that Lorie could be getting her messages was detached from the wall, so she wouldn't have gotten the messages people were leaving for her. And what was worse is he noticed like scuff marks and what looked like basically it looked like somebody had been dragged through the hallway and was like kicking and scratching and trying to stop themselves is what it's believed these marks were from, going down the hallway towards her bedroom. And there was a single gold hoop with some hair in it, just like on the hallway floor. The officer noted that Lorie had at least made it to the store. Because you remember how she was going to go to the store and get drink mixes and things like that to take to Lindsay's? Well, they were able to tell that she had gone to the store and had even made it home because there were some groceries already in the house and there was a sign. Basically, some of the groceries were in the house and some hadn't even made it into the house. So she got home and was presumably like something happened to her after getting home while she was unloading her groceries, but before even completing the unloading of her groceries. And they were later able to like confirm for sure that she had gone to the store and came back, even though like, why do you need to confirm that when the stuff is in the house? I guess somebody else could have brought it, but they were able to confirm this by surveillance from a Walmart that showed her there shopping, checking out. And after that, she was just gone. Now, you remember how I said that there were like scuff marks and scratches in the hallway and the hoop, and it was like leading towards her bedroom. Well, inside the bedroom, the officer noted that Lorie's bed wasn't neat. It was very messy and disheveled. There was a phone on the floor and the cord, like the phone cord that would connect it to the wall, was missing. In addition to the phone cord being missing, Lorie's loved ones told the officer that other items were missing too, like her car, her purse, a couch pillow, a Galileo thermometer, her wallet, a green trash can that she normally kept gardening tools in. The can and the tools were normally outside the trailer, like closer to the door, but they were missing. But the lid, however, was found in like one of the storage rooms of Lorie's home. Another thing or few things that were missing from Lorie's trailer were these 3 rugs that Lorie kept in her kitchen. And these rugs ended up being a big thing later. And they were a big thing to be missing in the first place because Lorie kept these on her kitchen floor. And that's because Peanut would not walk on tile floor. Like Peanut would only walk on like soft carpet. So she had these rugs in the kitchen so he could hop from carpet to carpet and never have to touch the linoleum floor, which if you know, you know, this is giving Marbles, Mr. Marble, Bobby if you nasty, so bad. It's giving Marbles. Now, as we sometimes see in these cases, Lorie's disappearance was not taken seriously at first. Like, they did file a missing persons report, but the officer was kind of like, to Lorie's mom, like, we got to wait 48 hours before we really do anything. And their reasoning for thinking that she ran away, despite the officer himself saying there was sign of a struggle and missing cords and shit like that. And it seems very much like they should have taken it seriously that moment. Their rationalizing reason? Their reason for rationalizing this was that Auburn was like a college football town and there were a lot of youths all over the place, and oftentimes kids would just like disappear for a short amount of time, but they always came back. Now her family thought this was total shit. They were like, she would never run away. This isn't in her nature. And her friends agreed. They were like, she didn't really have anything going wrong in her life. Like, she wasn't like totally happy with her job and she wasn't totally happy with her salary she was making, but that wasn't enough for her to just like bounce and ditch her life and leave her dog and leave her family and friends. But the police thought, maybe she had. Despite this, though, a bolo was issued for Lorie and also for her car, and this bolo went out all across the state. At the time of her disappearance, she was 24 years old. She was 5'7", about 160 pounds, blonde or strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had pierced ears. Now, it did not take long for this bolo to be effective because the very next day, so that would be 4 days after Lorie actually disappeared, it was just after 4:30 in the morning when Lorie's blue Mazda that she had literally just purchased was found engulfed in flames at the end of DeKalb, Dekalb Street, in a cul-de-sac that faced towards, oh my goodness, Opelika Road outside a construction site. If you're local, please tell us. Did I say those street names correctly? And if not, can you tell us how? Now, they were able to tell by looking at this car that it was intentionally set on fire. It wasn't like an issue with the car. Somebody had lit it on fire with a lighter, papers, and gasoline. But luckily, Lorie was not in the car at the time that it was burned, so her family could still hold out some sort of hope that she may be out there okay somewhere. Now, at the scene, they did find some evidence, not a lot, but some. One thing that they found on the first day that they were searching the car and the area near the car was a hand-rolled, like a partial, most of, a hand-rolled cigarette that was wet, but not like soaked, and it was still mostly intact. And this was a good piece of evidence because if you do not know, if you've never smoked or known anybody who smoked, and especially if you haven't known somebody who hand rolls their cigarettes. If you hand roll your cigarettes, you lick the paper, or if you roll the joint, you lick the paper to make it stick like you would with like an envelope or to stamps. Do you do that with stamps? I think stamps just stick. Who uses stamps anymore? I actually just used a bunch of stamps to send out invitations to my baby's second birthday. I don't want to talk about it, but you lick it to stick it. So it has the potential to have DNA on it. So this could have been a good piece of evidence. Now, you may notice that I said could, and that is because in this case, the ball was dropped in a real way. This evidence was reportedly mishandled and also not tested. And I don't know who dropped the ball in this situation, but it definitely came into play later at trial. But anyways, that's really the only thing they found during their first search of the area that was noteworthy. They did go back and search again on another day, and it's at this point that they found a gas can that was in the wooded area at the end of the dead-end street. And it was at this point that it went from a missing persons case to something more serious. And Lori's mother was terrified, dude. I cannot imagine being her in this situation and have your daughter's car found set on fire. And she said of her fear and her stress at that time, quote, "The feelings were just unbelievable of fear and of knowing something bad has happened." Now, almost immediately, police had somebody that they believed was responsible for Lori's disappearance, and it happened to be the same person that Lori's mother immediately had a bad feeling about and thought may be responsible. And this was a man named Daryl Richard Ennis, who went by Rick. Now, there were a few reasons that people thought that Rick Ennis may be responsible for Lori's disappearance. One of the reasons was that Rick had a big old crush on Lorie. Big, huge. He met her through friends, and from the moment he met her, he was smitten, and he would tell anyone who would listen how in love he was with her, even people he didn't know that well. And reportedly, his feelings for her were so big that days before she disappeared, Rick had come to her home when she wasn't there, let himself in with a key that he had, and left her a love letter in her trailer. And she wasn't happy about this, okay? Lindsay, her best friend, said that Lorie was not happy at the fact that Rick couldn't accept that she didn't want to be more than just friends with him, and she was just kind of irritated that this was something she had to deal with, but she was planning on having a talk with Rick. But, that's not the only reason police suspected him, because in addition to him loving Lorie and not being loved in return by Lorie, Rick was also the last person to be with her before she disappeared. So you remember how Lorie and Lindsay talked on the phone at 6:30 the day that she disappeared about her going to the store, picking up drink mixes, and then heading over? Well, during that phone call, Lindsay could hear Rick in the background with Lorie when she made this call. At the time, she didn't think anything of it because, Lorie and Rick were friends, so it wasn't weird that he was there. But then, when Lorie goes missing, she can't get a hold of her. No one knows where she is. One of the very first people that Lindsay called or contacted was Rick, because he had been with her. Maybe he knew something, so she called him. She got no answer. She texted him, telling him, hey, Lori's missing. No one can get a hold of her. Do you know what's going on? Did she say anything to you? And eventually, he did write her back, and he seemed mildly worried, but basically said, no, he didn't know where she was, but he was sure she'd come back. So obviously, police wanted to speak with Rick, considering, he's the last person to see her, loved her, blah, blah, blah. So they reach out to him, and he agrees to talk to them. And he comes and he has to sit down and he has a conversation with them and gives him his version of events. He never denied seeing Lorie the day she went missing. He couldn't, right? People knew he had been with her. So he said that he had went to Lori's on Saturday, got there at about 3 just to say hi, talk a little while until she had to go to the store. He said that when he went to leave, he realized his car was locked, so he used a wire hanger of hers to open his door, though he didn't mention this right away and added it as a note later. But this hanger was also found, by the way, in Lori's home all stretched out, so that seemed to be true. Now, something that Rick said that was weird that definitely caught police's attention is he said that after Lorie went to the store, but before going to Lindsay's house, he believed that she was going to go and make a drug deal, or she was going to go and sell somebody weed. Rick said that the two of them, him and Lorie, were growing weed in her trailer. He said that they had about 5 pounds, though later he changed this to 4 pounds. And he said that he was going to keep 2.5 pounds and she was going to keep 2.5 pounds. Then she was going to go sell hers. And then she was going to give him $600, but she was going to keep the rest of the money because he owed her money. He said that he didn't know exactly who she was going to sell it to, but that she would sell hers to anyone. She was not afraid of people, no matter how shady they appeared, referring to her in the past tense, by the way, which officers noted. He said he left Lorie and then he went right to Montgomery, Alabama to meet a guy named Rod to sell his weed. But he said Rod didn't have any money, so he went back to Auburn, but not before hiding his weed at a place where he used to live. He says he didn't see Lorie the rest of that weekend, that he had spent his time driving back and forth to Montgomery, both on Sunday and on Monday. And finally, I believe it was on Monday, this guy Rod was able to buy this weed and gave him $2,400. But he says he couldn't prove that any of this happened because he had taken that $2,400 and had buried it behind Emily Avenue. Now, his alibi was looked into, but this couldn't be confirmed because they couldn't track down this person, Rod, at all. He didn't have a phone number and address. He couldn't track down Rod. And despite taking Rick on location to Emily Ave and digging up the whole area, they didn't find any money. On top of that, Rick had a girlfriend around the time that Lorie had gone missing, and they had been dating on and off. And I believe at the time that Lorie went missing, they were on and off period. So even though they weren't dating anymore, he would still stay on and off with her because they were friends. So he would stay with her sometimes, and sometimes he would stay at a place on Emily Avenue, which is where he had buried this money. I know this is sort of confusing, but this is his alibi. And police found that this girlfriend that he stayed with some time lived close enough to Lorie that he could just walk back and forth from this girlfriend's house to Lorie's house. I believe there were train tracks, and it was super close to where the car was found burned up as well. Anyways, this ex-girlfriend / friend / woman he lived on and off with, she was talked to by police, and she said that the Friday that Lorie disappeared, Rick had plans to hang out with 2 friends, and then he was going to meet up with her on Saturday. They had plans to get together, but Saturday came and went, and she never heard from him. She couldn't get a hold of him. She called him over and over. He never answered the phone, and all the calls were going straight to voicemail. And this is the same Saturday that Lorie was MIA as well. So all of these things combined are making people's spidey senses tingling. And tingly, they're making the spidey senses go crazy. And police feel like Rick is sending them on a wild goose chase. And the police officer who spoke to Rick said that they found his statements to be suspicious and conflicting. But here's the thing about Rick. Despite the fact that his alibi was looked into and proven to be not the truth, he was very set on pushing that narrative. This guy had biggest balls in the world in this guy. All the balls in the world on this guy. He called Lorie's mom. He called Lorie's distraught mother, and he told her he was just so worried about Lorie because he knew she had gone to do this drug deal and then disappeared. And immediately Arlene was like, I'm gonna call bullshit on that. I don't believe that at all. And she went from trusting him because this had been a friend of Lorie's to thinking that he was lying through his teeth. And she knew that Rick had told police this because police had already come to Lorie's trailer. They looked and they found no evidence that she had been involved in selling or distributing drugs, anything like that. So she was like, wow, I can't believe that this guy is lying like this, because she knew that Rick and her daughter were friends. She had even had Rick in her house for Christmas 2005. Lorie brought him home with her to have Christmas because, he had no family, which we'll find out later why he had no family. But Lorie felt bad for him knowing that he wasn't going to be able to do anything for Christmas. So she invited him to her mother's house, and Arlene had him in the house and thought he was nice and thought he was polite. And she just knew the two were close. It would be hard to imagine one of your kids' friends being responsible with them disappearing. Lorie had even, how I mentioned Lorie had just gotten a new car. Well, when she got a new car, she sold her old car to Rick. So she knew that the two were friends. But now Arlene's like, wow, he's lying, and he has to be lying to be taking heat off of himself. Why else would he do that? Because truth is, he had some heat on himself. He had some heat on himself. Sure, he had reason to be worried because not only was his alibi not doing well, but when he was brought in to be questioned a second time, police noticed something that they had missed the first time around. And that's that he had some signs of being in a struggle himself on his body. So he was wearing long sleeves, like I am today, and he was actually wearing 2 layers. But despite this, police were like, could you clip your sleeves a little bit? Can we look at your arms? And when he did, they found that he had scratch marks on his arms, his forearms, his inner arms, his palms, his hands, his knuckles. His arms were all scratched up. And that doesn't look good, right? And when they asked him, where did these come from? He said he didn't know, but they could tell that the scratches had been there a couple days, and Lorie had been missing a couple days. On top of that, they had searched his car, and they had found some things that they found to be suspicious. For example, various cleaning products, like a scrub brush, which comes up later at trial, air fresheners. They also found a knife and fuzzy handcuffs. Now, when asked why he had these items in his car, because they were like, this looks to be a murder kit. This is what they're thinking. He's like, the thing is, I'm moving I'm leaving right now. Actually, I'm going to be dipping very soon after this conversation. And I was just throwing random things in my car. And on top of all of that, on top of all the things that seemed weird, another thing that seemed weird to police is that Rick wasn't as helpful as you would think an innocent friend would be when their friend is missing. Like, he was the last person to see Lorie, but he didn't tell officers where he thought she was going or what she was wearing. He didn't do that till like a week later. And they were like, listen, if your friend was missing, why wouldn't you just offer this information up to police to make it easier for them to find her? You would think that that's what you would want. And he was like, well, like, they didn't ask me. Now, all of that seemed weird for sure. Okay. But when they combined that with one other thing about Rick, it really made them think it really made them feel like they were going down the right path, because they found in looking into Rick that he had a criminal history, and not like a little criminal history, not minor infractions here. Okay. Rick had been arrested when he was just 12 years old for murdering his parents. Well, his mother and his stepfather. And this is a thing that didn't come out to the public until after Rick went to trial, which is something we're going to get to, but it takes quite a while for us to get there. But after his trial, his three stepsisters, I cannot talk today, stepsisters, came out and made a statement where they said, quote, "In March 1993, our lives were forever changed at the hands of Rick Ennis. He brutally murdered our father, Eddie Joe Flowers, and stepmother, Linda Dolly Flowers. Andis was 12 years old at the time of the murders and was put into the juvenile justice system." So now let's talk about what happened there. Linda Flowers, who went by Dolly, this was Rick's mom, she met Eddie Joe Flowers at church, actually. The two met at church, and they really hit it off. They were both coming into their little union with kids from prior relationships, so they could kind of relate to each other in that way, and things moved pretty quickly with them getting married, actually just 10 months before they were killed. So what happened here is in March of 1993, 12-year-old Rick Ennis murdered his mother, Dolly, who was 40 at the time, by shooting her in the face with a .22 caliber rifle and beating her to death with a baseball bat. He then stayed in the home with his mother's body and waited for his stepfather to come home. This was 39-year-old Eddie Joe Flowers, who was he was a musician. He was lovingly given the nickname Elvis due to his sideburns. And he killed him by shooting him with a 16-gauge shotgun. After murdering his mother and stepfather, Rick Ennis stayed in the house with their bodies, they believe, for 2 days. This kid stayed in the house with the bodies for 2 days and even continued to go to school and act like things were totally normal before eventually deciding to flee. He then took his mother's car and yet another gun, a .38 caliber pistol, and headed towards Brantley, which was an area that his family had previously lived. But he didn't make it there because he crashed his car into a fence in Montgomery County on March 5th, 1993, and a state trooper named John Clark found him walking down a highway in Alabama and then pulled over. The officer said he had been driving when his headlights took a curve. There was a curve in the road and his headlights followed said curve as they're at the front of the car. And he saw him scan the boy walking on the side of the road with a backpack. And he's like, that's weird. So he pulled over and he asked him, what's going on? And this is when Rick told him, I was driving a car at my young age of 12 and I crashed into a fence. And he's like, oh, okay. That's weird. That's a weird thing for you to be saying. And it's a weird thing for you to have been doing. And for whatever reason, it seemed the theme here was weird. He got a weird feeling. So he asked Rick if he could search his backpack that he was wearing. And Rick agreed. So this cop opens the backpack of this 12-year-old. And the first thing he finds is a large kitchen knife. He said it was a big old kitchen knife. And he's like, again, that's weird. And as he looked further in the backpack, he found that there was a bunch of ammo, loose bullets of .22 caliber and 16 gauge, the guns he used to kill his parents. There was ammo from those guns just bouncing around loose in this backpack with this knife. With that, the cop put Rick in the back of the cop car thinking okay, something's wrong here. And he's about to get in a bunch of trouble from his parents for taking this car on a joyride. And so he asks him, he looks at this kid and he asks, okay, so where are your parents? And that's when Rick looked him straight in the face and said, quote, I killed them both. And the cop said he had no emotion, no tears, nothing, just straight up was just I killed them both. So with that, he finds out where the kid lived, where the parents lived, and he calls local authorities to go and check out the situation, to go to the house and see if everything was okay, see if this was true, whatever. And what's wild here is that officers who took this call at the time were being followed by a TV show called MPD, which looks to be, I don't think it's on anymore, but it looks to be like a cops show, like Cops, but out of Montgomery County specifically. So they're being followed by this TV show and are being recorded when they walk into this specific scene. I'm telling you, this case is crazy. I'm like, how have I not heard of it? How have we not talked about it? It seems absolutely insane to me. When they walked into the house, one of the first things they saw was the broken and bloodied bat that freaking Rick had used when murdering his mother, when he freaking shot her and beat her to death. And then they find her, and she's lying there with a velvet blanket over her face and a rose on her chest. He literally took a velvet blanket and put it over her face and put a rose on his chest, which immediately reminded me of the movie The Lodge. I don't know if you've seen it, but it makes me wonder if this was like a religious thing for Rick, because it seems so fucking weird. But I wonder if it was a religious thing, because in the movie The Lodge, which is similar, it is a religious thing. But either way, this is what all these people are walking into. This is the scene they're finding. Inside the home, they also found the evidence that Rick had been living there after killing them, like I told you they believed he had. And they found Rick's sort of to-do list. And on this list, he had wrote that he wanted to murder his 3 stepsisters, the daughters of Eddie Joe Flowers. Now, they had given a statement after that just said that they were very happy to be alive, considering Rick planned to kill them as well, but that their whole worlds were rocked and changed because their dad was like their world. And Dolly had been such a sweet woman. Like, one of his daughters, her name was Angela. She was 19 at the time that her father was killed, and she was in the Navy, I believe. And when she got the news that this had happened, she was just like, the hell? Because to hear about this happening and then to hear who did it, she didn't know Rick especially well. He was, 12 years old at the time, a kid. And she said at the times that they would get together because, again, Dolly and Eddie hadn't been together that long. But when she had been around it, Rick was just kind of standoffish. He would go in his room. He wouldn't come out. He wasn't really engaged. But to hear that he had done this to her father and his own mother, and he was only 12 years old, was insane. And she said of what she knew about Rick and his family and the dynamic there, she said, quote, Eddie Joe tried to explain that he loved Ricky and cared for him, but Ricky pushed him away. He stole guns from my family and made threats, but no one took him seriously. And that's red flags all over the place. A 12-year-old stealing guns and making threats. And speaking of Angela, just because, we are talking about her and that was her statement, she actually went on to get a job in law enforcement due to what happened to her father. And as of 2022, she was working for a sheriff's department in Florida. Now, there aren't a lot of statements that were given at the time that Rick killed his parents, from family members, from friends and things like that. I did find one statement from a stepbrother of his that just said that all Rick said about what he did is that he loved his mama and he had just lost it. Now, as far as the motive, as far as why Rick would do something like this at such a young age, it's honestly the stuff of nightmares when I read it, because it's such a non-motive for murder of all things. For a hissy fit, perhaps, but murder, it's just insane. Like he said, he killed his mom in such a violent way and his stepdad because they planned to move and he didn't want to switch schools. This is what he told police in 1993. And if that is the real reason, Jesus Christ. Now, this is what he's saying in 1993, but he does end up changing his story and his reasoning for why he did what he did later in life, because after he is arrested for Lori's murder, he does an interview with 48 Hours. It was Peter Van Sant who looked into this case, talked to friends and family members, and was also the one to interview Rick. And it was interesting because he said that he believes Rick is a genius. He said Rick had a genius level IQ, and that when you talk to him, it's clear that he knows that. He has very much of, I'm the smartest person in the room kind of attitude. And he was very obviously the type of person that could convince anyone of almost anything because he spoke with such confidence and reasoning. Now, during this interview, he was asked, right? Rick was asked, why did you murder your parents when you were 12? And this is when he gave a whole new reasoning. He said that he murdered his mother when he was 12 because she had been sexually abusing him. This is what he said. And he said specifically of this quote, I was deeply ashamed about my mother, me, and I had a really hard time talking about it. So that was his reasoning for trying to explain why he did what he did and why he didn't tell police at that time that this was why he did what he did. But It's worth mentioning that there is no evidence that this did happen. It could have happened, of course. We don't know because she's gone, because Rick murdered her. And it has been said that Rick seems like the type of person who would absolutely destroy the reputation of somebody that he had killed, even if they didn't do anything wrong. And I mean, they were dead at his hands. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know what to think there. But I could see how it would be easy to believe that that was true, because it's so hard to think of another reason why a 12-year-old would do what he did. Like, you would think that there'd have to be something to push a child into committing a murder like that. But I don't know. I don't know. You know, he didn't say anything about it until he was on the hook for another murder. So it's like, it's really hard to believe anything he says. And speaking of the murder, and speaking of Lorie specifically, Rick Ennis said during this 48 hours interview of the murder of Lori Slesinski, and I quote, "I never murdered Lori Slesinski. She was a very close, dear friend of mine. I never would have hurt her." But now let's go back a little bit to when Rick killed his parents. He's 12 years old, and he's arrested for murdering them because he didn't want to switch schools. Now, because Rick was 12 years old at the time, he could not be tried as an adult. In Alabama at that time, you had to be 14 or older to be tried as an adult, even if the crime was horrific like this. And because of the fact that he was going to be tried as a juvenile, his family knew that he was probably going to get like less than 10 years for what he did. And they were super unhappy about this because, I mean, obviously they didn't think it was enough time for what he did to these people. And, you know, it could be argued that they were right, because I don't think he served enough time for what he did, even if he was just 12 years old. I can say that because he served less than 9 years. He served less than 9 years. And during those 9 years while in jail, he tried to escape twice, and he didn't get any additional time for that. And so he was in juvie until he was 21 years old, and then he was released. He made his way to Auburn. He became friends with Lori Slesinski, and now she is missing. Police believe she's dead, and they feel so strongly in their guts that he's responsible, but they just don't have enough to prove it. Everything they have is circumstantial, and they don't feel like it's strong enough to prosecute, especially since they don't even feel like they have enough to prove that the crime has been committed and Lori's been killed. The lead investigator at the time made a statement that I thought was a very good statement and something for us to hear, even if it's frustrating in this situation because it seems so clear that Rick did it. The lead investigator said, quote, "We had our suspicions, of course, but if you don't have your evidence, I'm not going to convict someone, and you shouldn't." And I mean, sadly, that is true if you don't have your evidence, which it turns out they kind of did, but they didn't realize all that they had until, you know, cold case investigators got involved in the situation. But if you do have a case and you don't have the evidence, you probably shouldn't convict somebody, because that leads to innocent people being convicted for crimes they didn't commit. It's a fucking gray area, big time, man. But for years, despite not feeling like they had the evidence, for years, they worked on Lori's case. A lot of the investigators seeing her as their own daughter, and it helped keep them feeling motivated. But time moved on. Rick Ennis quickly ended up moving away from Auburn. And when I say quickly, I mean, I think a week after he was interviewed, he dipped, never to return again. And Lori's case quickly went cold. And her poor family, man, it was so hard on them to just have no answers for such a long time. And her mom said specifically of this, quote, "It's very hard on all of us. There are still many tearful days wondering what happened. It's all the unknowns, the questions that remain unanswered that are very difficult for us. We keep thinking she is out there somewhere. Is she being held captive? There are all those unknowns that keep going through our mind." And sadly, in this case, the unknown would be their reality for a long time. 10 years to be exact. It took 10 years for any real movement to happen on Lori's case again. And that's because the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency created a cold case unit and 2 cold case investigators, Special Agent Mark Whitaker, who led the unit, and his since then longtime partner, John J.W. Barnes. They were recommended by local authorities, Lori's case, and they chose her case to reinvestigate and began poring over files, re-interviewing witnesses, and sending out various pieces of evidence to forensic labs for testing. Apparently, Lori's case really hit them, particularly Whitaker, or at least he's the one who's been more vocal about that, because he said he saw his granddaughters and his nieces when he looked at Lorie, and he said he would just sit there and watched that surveillance video of her in Walmart, just walking around being totally normal, getting things to have a good night, and then poof, she was gone. And he and his partner really felt motivated to solve this because they really wanted to give that closure to Lori's mother, Arlene. And they said of this quote, "She's such a good woman. She's the strongest woman I've ever seen in my life to have been through everything she's been through. Her faith is unbelievable. And just, gosh, she's strong." And for a cute mid-video fun fact, because it just touched my heart a bit, apparently since all of this has happened, Arlene, Lori's mom, is really good friends with Whitaker, the cold case investigator, and his wife. And they're like still buds to this day. And that was just heartwarming for me to read. And I have to think that that's partially due to just like the way and the intensity with which he investigated Lori's case, because he even literally hung a photo of Lorie in his closet so he'd see her every day and be reminded of where his passion was coming from. And he said of this quote, "I was probably obsessed with this case, but I think you have to be." So anyways, they felt motivated, they felt competent, they felt excited to take on Lori's case, but they weren't sure that they'd be able to prosecute it without a body, because there are some prosecutors who won't even try to take on the case and won't even try to prosecute it without a body. So they went to the DA at that time, his name was Brandon Hughes, and they asked him, they're like, "Hey, if we are to do this and we don't have a body, would you be, willing to do it?" And Brandon was like, "Yeah, bring me a case and I'll look into it." And like, I am, in fact, down with that sickness. But Brandon Hughes actually didn't end up being the prosecutor who prosecuted Lori's case. Apparently, he got arrested and was charged with violations of State Ethics Act and conspiracy to commit theft in November of 2020, and he was convicted. So he wasn't the DA anymore, and a new DA took over, and her name was Jessica Ventier, I believe. And luckily, Jessica was also down with that sickness. Now, apparently, Jessica had like a personal reason to want to prosecute a case, even a cold case that was a murder case, and it's because her grandmother was actually murdered in the 1980s when she was working at a store that she owned. She owned a grocery store. She was working there, and a man came in, shot her, took like all that he wanted, stole shit from her, and then left. And as far as I know, her grandmother's murder was never solved. So she felt like connected to getting this case solved, getting it prosecuted, and said that she doesn't think anyone should be able to get away with murder, even if they're really good at hiding a body. And apparently her mother was also super invested in Lori's case, so she wanted to give them that justice. So the cold case investigators had the go-ahead to build the case, make it strong, we'll bring it to trial. So they needed to have a place to call their own, which it felt very much like something you would see in a movie. They ended up taking this used grand jury room and turned it into what they called their war room. You can picture the boards on the wall with the photos and the lists and all the evidence. All they were missing were the red strings, because I guess they didn't use computers. They were old school. They were very into physical media, but it's not called physical media, but I think you know what I mean. They had photos of where the car was burned, aerial photos of the whole area. They had photos of Lorie, photos of witnesses they had spoken to, photos of Rick. Everything, and they were just constantly combing through all of this evidence and putting it together like a puzzle. They were trying to solve the mystery of Pepe Sylvia. For 15 months, they lived this case. There were a bunch of investigators. Some people even came out of retirement to come back and specifically work this case, and they combed over everything. There were no days off, no weekends. They re-interviewed old witnesses. They found new witnesses. They found new pieces of evidence, and they tested old pieces of evidence that hadn't been tested, like the cigarette butt. The cigarette butt from the hand-rolled cigarette that was left at the scene that they had had this entire time, but that had never been tested for DNA. And that wasn't the only DNA found. They had found blood evidence in and on Lori's trailer, as well as DNA evidence found on her bed sheets from a very specific type of DNA that I'm sure you know what it is. And what's really fucked up about this and very frustrating is it turns out they had the results of these DNA tests, the blood and the secretion on the bed sheets, for years. Apparently, these pieces of evidence had been sent out for testing, but due to a turnover in management, so to speak, where I believe the lead investigator or somebody got promoted, retired, something like that, the results were put into an envelope, put into the case file, and not looked at for 10 years. Everything they had, everything they looked at led them right back to Rick Ennis as being the person responsible for Lori's murder, because at this point they believe that she's dead. It's been all these years. There's never been a phone call, no banking activity, not even a call to Lori's mother and father after her brother died, because her brother died after Rick was arrested, and she didn't even call then. The cold case team had gotten themselves to a point where they felt like this case was strong enough to prosecute. They knew it was a risk, though, right? To prosecute a capital murder case without a body is the rarest of the rare, but they were like, I think our case is strong enough. I think we have all the evidence we're going to have. I don't even think we're going to have a stronger case against Rick Ennis if we find Lori's body. This is what they're thinking. With that, 2 years later in 2018, they were able to locate and arrest Rick Ennis. And when I tell you, it was a production, man. Apparently there were like 100 officers who stormed this guy's home. There were officers from so many different agencies. There are so many different agencies, and I'm not even going to try to list them. I'm going to put them on the screen. All these agencies worked together to arrest a now 38-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis. And he was arrested in the 4800 block of Fisher's View Road in rural Pilot, Virginia, and was charged with the murder of Lori Slesinski. And reportedly, he was arrested on his birthday, August 6th, 2018. Now, with that, the prosecution was going to have the difficult task of trying to prosecute Rick Ennis for the murder of Lori Slesinski, all without a body. So investigators had completely combed through the case file on Lori's disappearance and eventually found what they considered to be critical evidence that had been overlooked during the previous investigation. And they now felt like it was enough to concretely link Rick Ennis to the disappearance of Lori, or murder rather, because so much time had gone by the time we got to this point, that they believed that Lori was no longer alive. This evidence included a partial rolled cigarette that had been found at the burn site of Lori's car back in 2006. A hand-rolled cigarette that they had all this time that had never been tested for DNA, despite the fact that it was a hand-rolled cigarette, so you would think there could be DNA on it, either from being smoked and, you put it into your mouth, or the fact that somebody probably licked it while rolling it, so there was likely saliva all over this bitch. The cigarette was tested, and it was a positive match for Rick Ennis. And that wasn't all they had. They had more DNA. They had DNA that was blood or could have been blood. Apparently it could also maybe have been considered to be skin cells. They couldn't say for sure, though oftentimes in the court they do call it blood, but it was said that it could not be blood. But it was found on the door handle of Lori's trailer, and that matched to Rick Ennis. And there was semen in her bed sheets that matched to Rick Ennis. And everything was a match to Rick Ennis. And it's so frustrating because if you watch part one, you know that they had all of this evidence all this time and it was just sitting there untouched for like ever. And it's just so irritating because it feels like maybe we could have gotten him arrested sooner. But here we find ourselves. So in August of 2018, the then DA of Lee County, his name was Brandon Hughes, he made a statement, an announcement, gave a press conference, whatever, saying that, Rick Ennis had been indicted for the murder of Lori Slesinski, and noted that finding Rick Ennis had not been an easy task because Rick Ennis was the type of person who did not want to be found. According to the DA, in doing their investigation to try to find him, they discovered that Rick Ennis was the type of person who moved around a lot and was the type of person who always had somebody else pay his bills, so there was no paper trail. Apparently, he was very proficient at flying under the radar. So when police first started to look for him, the very first place they went, or at least the first place it's reported that they went, was South Carolina, because they had received a tip that Rick was living there with a wife. Him and that wife have since been divorced, but they got a tip that he was there. And so they mobbed over. It was reported that within 30 minutes of finding out that he may be in South Carolina, all these officers, like 100 of them, got together. They briefed. They got their little plane tickets, and they rocked and they rolled right on over to South Carolina. Unfortunately, though, they get there, they look around, and they come to the conclusion that he is no longer in South Carolina. But they get another tip that he has now relocated to Virginia. So they head to Virginia. And let me tell you, in case you're not local or you're not too familiar with where the states are, Virginia and South Dakota, it's not South Dakota, South Carolina. My brain keeps wanting to say Dakota. I don't know why. Let's just say they're not exactly close, so I can only imagine the travel expense. But anyway, they get there. And yes, bitch, Rick Ennis is there. So, on his birthday, 100 officers raided the home he was in, which was located at the 4800 block of Fishers View Road in rural Pilot, Virginia. And when I say rural, I mean rural. I looked at an aerial map, and maybe it's just coming from the perspective of me, who is a Los Angelesonian, but the space, I cannot even imagine all that open space. But either way, that's where he was, and he was taken into custody. You know what? I just looked at a map because I was like, I've been getting South Dakota and South Carolina confused. Turns out South Carolina is a lot closer to Virginia than I thought it was. But either way, I guess they like really raided this guy. There were 100 officers, as I said, and they were hiding behind bushes, behind cars, and they totally took him by surprise. And not just him and his fiance, because by this time he was engaged to a school librarian. And for reference, at this time he was working building teepees or yurts, as they're often called. This fool was engaged and had been previously married. That's a lot to do in, 10 years? But, or 12 years, I guess, 2018, 12 years. That's a lot to do in that time, but this fool was engaged. So I guess he and his fiancée, Elena, met, and she immediately liked him. She said he was friendly and open and funny, and said that he is one of the most compassionate, generous, and kind people that she's ever known. She says that she fell in love with his brain first and that he was super smart. And dude, she still feels that way about him. Or at least she did at the time he went to trial. She supported him all throughout the trial, saying that there was no way he was guilty, that if anything, Rick would have given his life to save Lorie because that's the type of person he was. And she said all this despite knowing his history and knowing that he had killed his parents when he was a child. And I guess initially he didn't actually tell her himself. So she found out because 2 weeks into dating, she decided she wanted to kind of look up his family tree because she was an amateur genealogist, is how it's been reported. And when doing so, she found that he had committed these 2 murders. And when I say that out loud, because when I was, researching it and reading it, it didn't hit quite the same way as it does now that I'm saying it out loud. I guess it's fair that after just 2 weeks of dating, he wasn't like, oh, by the way, here's my history. But I can't even imagine dating somebody for 2 weeks and then finding that out. Dating sounds like a fucking nightmare. Anyways, apparently they sat down. He told her what happened. He told her why it happened, which he says he had told her. And by this time he had switched his story to the reason that he killed his mother was not that he didn't want to move. It was that she had been abusing him the way he, in a terrible way. And that the reason he never told police this, and so it wasn't reported that way, because she's like, well, that's not what you said back then, was because he was deeply ashamed of what happened and he didn't want anybody to know about it. Anyways, Rick was arrested and he was being held in jail in Virginia without bond while they worked on getting him extradited back to Lee County, Alabama. And initially he was going to have an extradition hearing. There was like a date set, but before the hearing actually happened, Rick decided to waive his extradition hearing. And so he was sent back to Lee County, where he was again held there without bond. And the prosecution was going after the death penalty. The Auburn police chief said of Rick's arrest, quote, "Today is about Lorie, her family, friends, and helping them know what happened to her 12 years ago. That has always been the goal and has remained our goal for the past 12 years." Now, once Rick was arrested, that cold case team, man, they were ecstatic with their victory, especially, again, Whitaker, or at least Whitaker was the one who spoke out the most about his experience with this, because he said being able to call Lorie's mother, Arlene, and give her this information was like the highlight of his career, though it was like a very sad call, because this poor woman had just been through so much, and yeah, it is really good news to finally get an arrest, but then at the same time, you have to know that that means that Lorie's gone, because for all this time she'd been holding out hope, a part of her, that Lorie may be out there, but now to know he's arrested and charged with her murder, that just kind of kills that little bit of hope that she had that Lorie may come home one day, and that's just gone now. I just can't imagine what all of this was like for her family, for her parents. I saw an interview that her mom did, and it was, I believe, 6 years after Lorie had gone missing, and even at that point she was still saying that she hoped Lorie was alive out there, but that she just didn't believe that Lorie would have left on her own. She said that she never believed that Lorie just was not the type, that she wouldn't have left, that she loved her family, she loved her friends, and if there had been anything going on in her life that was so serious that it would make her want to run away, she would have told them, and even so, she never would have left Peanut. And she also said at that time that she was confused. She was confused because if somebody had done this to her, and she had been murdered, it didn't make any sense to her because she had no enemies. She was such a loved person. So she said she held out hope, and that as a parent, you always had to have hope. But now, after all these years of hoping and suffering, she's getting the call that Rick Ennis has been arrested. Oh God, dude. And you know what? Speaking of everything this poor woman has been through, oh my God, I just feel so bad for her because shortly after Rick was arrested, her other child, Lori's older brother, Paul, at 41 years old, died from cancer and a stroke. And not just Arlene, because I mention Arlene a lot because she did a lot of interviews and also because she goes through even more trauma later. But her husband, Casey, also, he had lost both of his kids. And I'm just happy that they were both still alive to see him be arrested, because we do sometimes see this in cold cases where, you know, family members pass on before they're able to see justice served. And that does sort of happen in this case, but that's something we'll get into a little bit later. But after Rick Ennis was arrested, Lori's father, Casey, did make a statement where he said, quote, "This arrest will bring justice to our daughter, Lorie." Now, Rick was arrested in 2018, but it would take 3.5 years before this case would finally go to trial, which is unfortunately pretty common. We see this all the time where cases just take forever to get going, but there were just like a lot of delays and a lot of like rescheduling of hearings because it was a death penalty case. And then there was COVID protocols because I believe one of his hearings was set to take place in February of 2020. And don't we know, ain't nothing was happening in February of 2020. Was it in March? Was it in March of 2020 that things stopped happening? Truly, it is all a blur now. Oh, and during the time of all the delays, his attorney did file a motion to just try to get the whole case thrown out because he's like, this case is bullshit. But that was not successful. And he ended up having Rick undergo like a psychological evaluation to see if he was even fit to stand trial. And guess what? Shyamalan twist, he was. So finally, in March of 2022, so just 2 years ago now, the case went to trial. Now, what's so sad, and something that I alluded to a couple of minutes ago now, is that Lori's father, Casey, never got to see this case go to trial because in 2020, he got COVID and he ended up dying from COVID. And Arlene, man, to lose Lorie, to find out Rick was going to be arrested, then to have her son die, and then to get the call that she needs to hurry over and see her husband because he's not doing well. She got there and he was gone. So she had to go through this whole situation, this whole trial alone. She had to sit there and hear the prosecution say that her daughter was dead and to lay out all the evidence that proved that. In the opening statement, the prosecutor said of Lorie, and I quote, "Lorie is not missing. Lorie is dead. And not just dead, she's murdered." Now they did this. They had to be so blunt because they had to prove that without a body, Lorie was actually dead. And the prosecution told the court, since that day in 2006, there has been no sign of Lorie. Nothing. She's made no contact with her family, with her friends. There's been no birthday cards, no Mother's Day card, no calls, not even a call when her brother died or her father died. There had been no reports of passports, driver's licenses, no credit history, nothing for Lorie since that day. And it's not like she had any way to get anywhere because her only mode of transportation, her car, was left burned up at the end of a dead-end road, and she had no reason to leave anyway. She had future plans, a family who loved her, a dog she loved, a dog that the prosecutor reminded the jury was Lorie's world, and the two were inseparable. Which I feel like some people who aren't animal people are going to be like, a dog, it's a dog. But if you're an animal person, your dog is your dog. And speaking of this dog, for the animal lovers who may be wondering about Peanut's well-being after Lorie disappeared, well, Lorie's mom, Arlene, ended up adopting Peanut, so he lived with her. And she found comfort in having this, little piece of her daughter with her. And Peanut lived with her and her family until he was 16 years old. And then, dogs. He sadly died because dogs don't live that long, which is fucked up, but it's true. And what's super sweet here is Arlene said that Peanut never forgot Lorie, which is heart-wrenching. She said that anytime Lorie's name was mentioned, if Peanut was within earshot, no matter what he was doing, no matter where he was, he would run over and come into the room where is she? And she was just kind of in awe and amazed that this little dog never forgot his mama. And another thing that's super sweet, to keep going on this mid-video dog happy note is that prior to Peanut, Arlene wasn't like a big dog person, but Peanut had really like changed her position and changed her perception on what it was like to love a dog. So after Peanut passed, she adopted a new dog named Daisy. And she said that she knew that Peanut being able to change her into a dog lover would have made Lorie smile. But I have digressed. So back to the trial and back to the opening statement. The prosecution said, no one knows what happened to Lorie. No one knows where she is except for one person. And then they said, quote, the only person who can tell us where she is also the last person to have seen her alive. And that's him. Referring to Rick, obviously. The prosecution said that Rick had killed Lorie because he was romantically obsessed with her and that she had refused to be more than just friends. Rick himself had said that he wanted to be more than friends with Lorie and that her not wanting to be more than friends was tough because he had, quote, deep feelings for her. They pointed out that shortly before Lorie was killed, Rick had written her a love letter and left it in her apartment and that this had really upset her. And they implied that this was the reason that Lorie had asked Rick to return her house key. Because if you remember from last week, Rick had a key to Lorie's home and the prosecution was saying, or rather, let me back up. Rick said that he had left the letter and the key at the same time, that Lorie had asked him to return the key, and it wasn't related at all to his feelings for her or the letter. So he left the key and the letter at the same time. But the prosecution said that they believe that Rick had used the key, went into the house, left the letter, and that this upset Lorie, and she felt like it was a violation of trust. So that's why she had asked him to give back the key, and that this had really upset him. They noted at court, the prosecution, that Rick was the last person to have seen Lorie alive and that when he was questioned just days after she went missing, he had scratch marks all over his arms and all over his hands that looked to be a few days old and that Lorie had been missing a few days. They also noted that when they searched Rick's car, they found what they believed to be a murder toolkit that included cleaning supplies, fuzzy handcuffs, and a knife. So the prosecution had some key pieces of evidence that they presented at trial that they said proved conclusively that Rick Ennis had murdered Lori Slesinski and had witnesses who were able to place these key pieces of evidence with Rick in the years following her disappearance. And they had somebody who was a key witness who testified that Rick had confessed to him when the two had been friends, confessed to Lori's murder. For example, when it comes to the evidence, they had at least two witnesses who said they knew that Rick would often roll his own cigarettes because, remember, a hand-rolled cigarette with his DNA was found at the burn site. They also had someone who linked him to the gas can found at the burn site, the missing rugs from Lori's mobile home, the Galileo glass thermometer that Arlene had gotten Lorie for Christmas, which was missing from her trailer, all that. They had people who said he had all those things. So with that, let's start with the gas can, and then I think we'll go into the rugs and the thermometer, and then end with the confession. So the gas can. The prosecution brought up a man named Jeremy as a witness, and Jeremy had worked with Rick at a bowling alley, which incidentally was very close to where Lori's car was found burned up back in 2006. Jeremy testified that on June 9th, 2006, he had been at home, he was cooking himself dinner when his phone rang. He says he answers the phone, and Rick Ennis was on the other line, and he said that this was unusual because Rick had never called him at his home before. But he says that Rick called him to say that he had run out of gas and asked if Jeremy could bring him some. Now, he says that he didn't want to. He wanted to be like, actually, I'm just going to eat dinner and stay home, but also as a person in need. So he decided he would go after he finished eating his dinner. So he finished eating, finished cooking, finished eating, then went to the bowling alley where the two had worked, grabbed one of the, I believe there were 3 gas cans from there, went to the gas station, filled it up with gas, and then met Rick at a local church where he supposedly had run out of gas. He said that when he got to the church, he pulled up next to Rick. And in hindsight, when he looks back at that situation, he thought it was weird because Rick was backed into a parking spot. And you would just think that if a person's running out of gas, they might not bother to put in that much effort. But I also know that some people just always like to back into parking spots. So maybe it wasn't weird, but he was thinking in hindsight that it was. But he said he doesn't. He says he parks next to, he parked next to Rick's backed-in car. He rolled down his window. Rick got out and walked up to his car. And he said the next thing that stood out to him that was strange is that Rick asked him if Jeremy wouldn't mind getting out of his car and putting gas into Rick's car for him. And Jeremy was like, no, I'm not your gas bitch, direct quote. But no, he didn't say that. He said, no, how about you do it yourself? Because why would I ever do that for you? So Rick does. He puts the gas in his own car, and then he asks Jeremy if Jeremy wouldn't mind letting him keep the gas can. And he's like, no, I have to return it. I took that from work. But anyways, he says Rick put the gas in his car, and then afterwards he started up his car, and it started up right away. And he found this to be odd too, because he was a person who worked on cars, and he knew that generally if a car had been running out of gas and you added gas to it, it would take a little bit for the gas to get through the lines and start up the car, but it started up right away. But he didn't really think much of it at the time because he just wanted to get home. He didn't want to be in this situation in the first place. So he took the gas can and he returned it to the bowling alley, and then he went home. He said from there, he really didn't think about this interaction again until he was sitting down with the police being questioned about Lori's disappearance and her burnt up car. He said around the time he was questioned, he realized that one of the gas cans that had been there after he returned from that interaction with Rick was now missing. They were missing a gas can. And when he was shown a photo of the gas can that was found at the burn site of Lori's car, he said that he believed that was the gas can from the bowling alley. Now, the defense attacked this and was like, listen, there are a zillion gas cans in the world. How can you look at a photo of this gas can and just know that it's the one from the bowling alley? And Jeremy responded saying, quote, "It was the same size, same color, same shape, same top. It physically matched the one that was missing from the fire cabinet. Again, it resembles 100% the can that was in the fire cabinet that was missing." He also testified that after he was questioned by police, Rick reached out to him and called him worried, saying that he believed the police were treating him as a prime suspect. And he said during this conversation, Rick also seemed a little frantic and wanted to know if Jeremy wanted to buy anything from him, wanted to buy any DVDs in his motorcycle. And he said he felt like Rick was trying to liquidate his assets and get quick cash so that he could dip. But that was, of course, just his speculation on the situation. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this. It could be a coincidence, right? I don't know a lot about gas cans, and I don't know if they are that distinct that you would be able to be like, yep, that's the gas can from the bowling alley. So if you know anything about that, let me know what you think. Do you think it's a coincidence? Do you think it could be the same thing? I'm kind of curious about your thoughts there. Now, another person who testified for the prosecution was somebody who was friends with Rick, whose name was Sissons. Now, apparently, Rick and Sissons met in 2007, so this would have been after Lorie went missing. The two worked together, they became roommates, and he said during that time, Rick had talked to him about Lorie. He said that Lorie was a really good friend of his who went missing that he loved very much, and he says that Rick told him that he had lived on and off with Lorie. Though I did not see that confirmed. Not that I didn't see it confirmed that Sissons said this, I didn't see it confirmed that Rick and Lorie lived on and off together. I didn't see anyone she knew say that that was true. Now, while on the stand, Sissons said that while the two were friends and living together, he had only known Rick by the name Rick. But he said one day he had been at home and a piece of mail had came that had Rick's entire name, like his full name, because it's Daryl Richard Ennis, not Rick Ennis, on the mail. And that Sissons just got a little curious about the person he was living with. So he Googled Rick's whole name. And he said that he saw something that freaked him out. Now, if you watched last week's video, you probably know what he saw. He saw information about the brutal murder of Rick Ennis' mother and stepfather that he committed when he was 12 years old. But when on the stand, when he was like, I saw something and it freaked me out, immediately that line of questioning was shut the fuck down. The judge called, the attorneys to the bench. They had a conversation. And when the line of questioning resumed, Sissons did not say anything about that again. This is because Rick was a minor at the time those murders were committed, so his case was sealed, which means it's sealed to the public and wasn't privy information. The jury at the trial wasn't privy to the information that Rick had previously murdered two people. And while we're on the subject of his record, apparently, after he was arrested for Lori's murder, other court documents were released. People were sleuthing. They were looking into him, and they found that there were court records that in 2003, Rick had been arrested for kidnapping, rape, and sodomy of another young woman, okay? But this case had gone to a grand jury, and they had decided not to press charges because they didn't feel like there was enough evidence to get a conviction. Which, he is innocent of that because he didn't go to trial, but it's very interesting considering the things we know about this person. That's all I will say. But back to the trial he's at now, where he actually is going to trial for what he did. The trial resumed, and Sissons said that after seeing the super secret thing about Rick, when he Googled him, he called Rick and he told him, hey, I'm gonna need you to fucking move out. And that Rick was very surprised. I'm like, what the fuck? Why? Why do I gotta go? What did I do? That night, Sissons decided to stay with his girlfriend so that he could give Rick an opportunity to get his stuff and get out of the apartment without any sort of altercation happening, because he wasn't interested in that. And the next day, he actually called the cops to ask them to escort him to his apartment to make sure Rick was gone, because he was scared of Rick now after what he saw. They said when he got there, luckily Rick was gone, but his apartment was trashed. He said things were thrown around, things were broken, the stove was on, and there were remnants of something that had been burnt. Now, all of this seems random, but it does matter, I promise. And it's because during this whole thing, the trashing of his apartment, kicking, Rick out and all that, he found something. He found some evidence that ended up being used at trial. And it's because there were some of Rick's items that were nicely packaged, put in a bag left by the door. It definitely looked like this was something he planned to take with him, but somehow just forgot. And what was in this bag, or what were in these, there were 3 rugs. Okay, there were 3 rugs inside this bag that looked like Rick was planning to take them with him, and Sissons had held on to these rugs. So when Rick got arrested and was being charged with murder and Sissons found out, he reached out to local authorities, who then got him in contact with the Auburn Police Department, and he gave them these rugs. And these rugs ended up being identified as the rugs that were taken from Lori's mobile home when she went missing. You remember the rugs that Peanut would hop on from rug to rug because he didn't like tile? Rick had them. And Sissons even told police that because him and Rick had been friends, they had talked about the rugs at some point, and Rick had mentioned to him that at least one of these rugs was a gift from his missing friend, Lorie. So he had these rugs. They tested these rugs, and they did find that Rick Ennis's blood was on at least one of these rugs, which I will say, they make it like a big thing at trial that, his blood was on one of the rugs, but I'm kind of like, he was using these rugs as like his rugs in his home after she went missing. So his blood being on them does make sense to me, but these rugs being identified by Lori's family and friends as her rugs that were taken when she went missing makes a lot less sense to me. Oh, and on top of that, because Sissons had one more piece of information that was just, verbal. He didn't have anything physical to prove it, but this is something he said. He said that when Rick and he were just friends before they moved in together, he had been at Rick's previous place where he had lived, and in his room, he saw a glass Galileo thermometer, just like the one that Lori's mom had gotten for her, and that was missing when Lorie went missing. But he said that once he and Rick moved in together, he didn't see that thermometer again. Now, we're moving on to the testimony of Terry. And Terry is a friend, or an old friend, somebody who definitely is no longer friends with Rick, but in 2008 they were. So Terry and Rick had been coworkers. They worked together at Sam's Club in South Carolina. And on the day that we're going to talk about right now, he and Rick had gone to a sports bar called Wild Wings Cafe. The two were just hanging out, having a couple drinks, chatting away like buds do, when he asked Rick, so what brings you to South Carolina? Why did you leave Auburn? Because remember, Rick left Auburn pretty quickly after Lorie disappeared, telling investigators that things, were just too uncomfortable for him. But he tells Terry something totally different, and he tells Terry something that is very telling. Terry said of this quote, he said he had gotten into some trouble and had to get out of town. And he also said that he had to take care of some business that he had to, quote, strangle a bitch. Terry added, quote, he said that they were acquaintances and that he had had a relationship with her, but she didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he was a little upset about that. And Terry said that Rick said that the girl he had to do this to was, quote, a white piece of trailer park trash. Now, he says at the time when Rick said this, he didn't believe him. He thought he was joking, gassing himself up, which, what a joke, I guess. Haha, so funny. But he didn't think much of it. He didn't think it was serious. Until years later, Rick gets arrested. Articles are written about it. A mutual friend of Rick's and Terry's sends Terry an article about Rick's arrest. He's like, did you see this? What do you think about this? Terry sees it. He reads what he's arrested for, and he's like, oh shit, maybe that wasn't a joke. And he contacts the Auburn Police Department to tell them what he knows. Now, I will just mention this because it happened, though I don't think it's particularly relevant, but it is worth mentioning because it did happen. During cross-examination, Terry did admit that he had been convicted of a fraud case in his life, and I don't really know what the defense was trying to do. I believe they were probably just trying to say that, like, Terry wasn't a trustworthy person because he'd been to jail before, but it didn't feel totally related because I don't think Terry got anything for his testimony, but this did happen. And speaking of the defense was basically saying that the police had fucked up this case, that they had bungled evidence, and even said that the police had planted evidence in order to get a conviction against Rick Ennis for the murder of Lori Slesinski. The defense said that they believe that the cigarette with Rick's DNA was planted as evidence to frame him, pointing out that everything at the crime scene was super soaked with water due to firefighters putting out the fire, but the hand-rolled cigarette was only partially wet, and they also noted that there was no chain of custody that proved the cigarette was even found at the scene. It was just found years later in an evidence bag in the file with no explanation as to how it actually got there, which is a problem. Right? You do need to have a chain of custody. That's what proves that something wasn't planted. And the defense is saying that wasn't there. He then said that the police got tunnel vision on Rick right from the start and wanted to convict him on pure speculation, and said specifically of this quote, "The 18-month investigation was not an investigation or a re-investigation of Lorie. It was an investigation on Rick." Now, the defense did something that was sort of unusual in the type of case that we're talking about today, and that's that they actually put Rick on the stand to testify on his own behalf. He was going to be there to sort of explain the evidence that police had found and to discredit the testimony of the witnesses who had placed other evidence, in his hates and the confession and shit like that. Rick maintained his innocence, saying that he and Lorie were friends. They were good friends. They were friends with benefits, in fact, and said that he and Lorie had spent time together the day that she went missing, but then she left to go and sell some weed that the two had been growing together to a dealer. He was still sticking with this story, which felt very much like he was trying to imply that a random drug dealer had murdered Lorie, but if you recall, Lori's dog was cared for all those days that she had been missing, and what random drug dealer who didn't know her and didn't know Peanut, why would they bother? Now, the friends with benefits thing, that's a really convenient way to explain the semen on her bed sheets now that you know that it's been found there, right? He said about their relationship, that the two started having a physical relationship about 2 months before she went missing, and the last time they had been physical together was a week before she went missing. But her friends, her family were like, actually, no, that's bullshit, which nobody knows anyone's personal life, but it seems pretty clear that wasn't true, especially since she was so annoyed that he had expressed his feelings for her. Why would she do that? I mean, I guess you could make the argument that it's possible, but the people who knew her said it was bullshit. And as far as the drugs thing, this is his, his explanation as to what may have happened to Lorie and how it wasn't him. Police looked into it and they have found no evidence that she was growing and selling drugs. And they talked to friends and family and said that maybe in her life she had grown 1 or 2 plants for personal use, but that she had never been a drug dealer. He was asked about his deep feelings for Lorie and the love letter he wrote to her before she disappeared, and he said that yes, he liked her. He had wrote her that letter asking to be together, and that the two had talked, and she said that she didn't have feelings for him or didn't have feelings like that and just wanted to be friends. And when discussing the letter, he was asked if the letter was just asking her out, why did it upset her so much? Because she was reportedly pretty irritated by it. He said he didn't really understand why people were saying that she was so upset because she wasn't mad. She wasn't happy about it, but she wasn't mad. He says that she asked him why are you asking now? Why did you wait so long to ask this? Because at this point, we've been friends so long, I want to just keep it as friends. So that was his explanation for all that. He maintained that he did not kill her. And when it came to the scratches on his arms, he said that, those had come from his dog. Though at the time when he was asked, when they were fresh, when this had just happened, he said he had no idea how they got there. But now he's saying, you know what? Those are from my bulldog. Which, man, that bulldog sure played a big part in what was going on with Rick Ennis. Because you remember from episode 1, there was a scrub brush found in his car. Well, there was blood found on that. And he's like, I use that on my dog too, actually, because she gets dog periods and I have to clean blood out of my car all the time, every day, every month, even though I believe dogs don't have periods every month like people do. But that's what he said. He also said that he didn't have a key to the bowling alley and had quit the bowling alley weeks before Lorie went missing, so he couldn't have taken the gas can. He said that he never trashed Sisson's apartment. Doesn't know why he said that. And that the rugs that were found in Sisson's apartment weren't Lorie's, that he had bought them at Target. And he said he never told Terry that he had strangled anyone. So he's explaining everything away that he can, or at least trying to. But the one thing he couldn't explain away was his DNA, his blood being found in Lorie's trailer. And the prosecution said to him of this, quote, "The blood in Lorie's trailer has your DNA in it. How did it get there?" And he responded, quote, "I have no idea." The defense closed by saying that this was simply a circumstantial case, which is true, right? But all of the evidence does paint a picture of what happened. That's what a circumstantial case does. And it seems pretty clear what the picture is that it's painting. She was gone, right? And there were signs of a struggle. Though the defense does say that you can't prove that those signs of a struggle, the scuff marks, happened at this time when she went missing. They could have been there a long time. And the gold hoop, the gold earring that was found that had the hair in it, the DNA couldn't be linked to Rick. But all the evidence they did have did link to Rick. He tried to discredit all of it, as I said, and anything that he could not discredit, his attorney tried to say was planted. This is the type of case, a circumstantial case, that you really have to look at and see if it makes sense. And the defense was saying that it didn't, that the case that the prosecution was laying out the motivation, what's the word I'm looking for? The motive. The motive just didn't make sense. He asked the jury, is it reasonable for a person to murder another person because they just want to be friends? Is it reasonable based on the evidence? Is it reasonable based on your own personal life experiences? And the prosecution said, listen, this wasn't little love. This wasn't puppy love. This wasn't something that Rick was going to get over easily. He was obsessed. He constantly talked about how in love he was with Lorie. He told everyone who would listen, anyone who would listen, how much he loved her, even people he wasn't close with. He wrote her a letter expressing this love. He came into her home when she wasn't there and he left it for her, which just shows that he has no boundaries. He doesn't respect boundaries. They also said that the idea that the two were friends with benefits was ludicrous, made up, and said specifically of this, quote, "It's very easy to say you had consensual sex with a woman you know is dead." After 10 days of trial, it was up to the jury to decide if Rick Ennis was guilty of the murder of Lori Slesinski. And after determining this, if he was found guilty, it was up to them to determine if he was going to spend life in prison without parole or be killed by lethal injection. In April of 2022, on their second day of deliberation, they had come back with their decision. They had found Rick Ennis guilty on 2 counts of capital murder, including capital murder burglary and capital murder kidnapping, both charges bringing with it the death penalty. And they did all of this. They came to this decision all without a body, which, man, is always wild to see. But as the prosecutor said on this case, quote, "I think we can all agree there should be no reward for someone who's good at dumping a body. You should not get a prize for body disposal. You should be held accountable for their murder, even though you were really good at dumping it." Lori's mother was so happy and relieved to finally be able to put this part of the story behind her. And she said after the verdict was read, quote, "I believe Lorie and all her family in heaven are celebrating today." And she was referring to her father, Casey, her brother, Paul, and Peanut. And she said that her reuniting with Lorie in heaven is going to be a joyous day. After the verdict was read, a new trial date was set so that they could, have his sentencing. It was going to be happening on a different day where they were going to determine if he was going to be sent to life in prison or given the death penalty. But this didn't end up happening because the DA told the judge during this day, when the verdict was read, that Arlene, Lori's mother, did not want to pursue the death penalty. I guess initially she wasn't sure, but after sitting down with the DA and talking about what going for the death penalty really meant, she decided that it would be best to just not go after it because she didn't want to deal with all of the lengthy appeals that come with giving somebody the death penalty. And Arlene said of this decision, quote, "It's been a difficult road. I won't lie to y'all, but God has given me the strength to persevere. As long as he's locked away for life, that's all that matters to me." She said, as long as he's given life in prison with no possibility of parole, I'm fine, but I don't want to be drugged through this for the rest of my life. With that, on April 14th, 2022, Judge Walker sentenced Rick Ennis to life in prison with no possibility of parole. After the sentencing, Lori's family left the courtroom hugging and crying like those who loved her were so happy, and those who were there for Rick were kind of in shock. They really did not believe that he was going to be found guilty. Like, his fiance was there, and apparently she just collapsed into like somebody who was next to her crying and sobbing. She was so surprised this happened. She was so certain that he was going to be exonerated that she had made plans for after the hearing to like go and celebrate. Now, Rick Ennis did say that he plans to appeal, but as of now, I haven't seen anything that shows that he has done that. But it is also relatively new, so that could be in the works. Now, the law enforcement officials who worked this case are so proud of their work. Like Whitaker, Arlene's hero, as she calls him, said that this was the best day of his career. And the prosecutor said that it's bittersweet because they got him behind bars, but she wasn't able to bring Lori's body home for Arlene, and she wishes that she could have, but like, Rick's appeal makes it seem like he's not going to reveal the location of her body, which is such a shame because I just don't see how a person could do that. How somebody could let this woman, let Arlene's mother, her friends, her family, let them suffer like that. But, like, Rick's not a normal person. One of the special agents who helped crack this case, well, according to Dwight, you don't crack a case, you solve a case. But this was Whitaker, said of Rick Ennis, quote, "I've seen a lot of bad people in my career who have done a lot of bad things, but he is one of the most evil people I've ever seen in my life." And man, he'd have to be evil to do what they believe he did to her, because they believe he went to her trailer, he attacked her, he assaulted her, and then with that phone cord, he either tied her up or strangled her with it. But either way, he killed her. After the sentencing, Arlene went back to her home and she spent some time in Lori's trailer, which she keeps on her property. And she said that she had a conversation with Lorie where she just told her, like, "We finally did it. We finally got you justice." She said that she goes to that trailer from time to time to think about things, to think about Lorie, to connect with her, and to think about happier times. Though it's also hard because she thinks about the horrible things that likely happened to her daughter in that trailer. She thinks about how, at this point of her life, she could have been, done with work. She could have retired. She could have been spending time with her daughter and her grandkids, but that's all gone. Now, remember how I said that it wasn't really public knowledge at the time of his trial that Rick had killed his parents, that wasn't privy to the jury? Well, after he was convicted of Lori's murder, it all came out. Like three stepsisters who, incidentally, he had written that he wanted to murder on his to-do list, they came out and gave a statement saying exactly what he did. They said that many people believe that kids don't commit these types of horrible crimes, implying that people don't think these kids should serve long sentences, but that's not true. And they said specifically of their father, who was murdered at Rick's hands, quote, "We have missed our daddy for 29 long years. He hasn't been there for graduations, marriages, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren being born, and the joy of watching them grow, loving them and spoiling them, fishing trips, holidays, family gatherings." And the list could go on. They added that Rick Ennis was finally being held accountable, was finally being put in jail for a prolonged period of time, and said that their family can finally breathe a sigh of relief knowing that some sort of justice is being served. Because remember, he served less than a decade for brutally murdering two people, was released, and then went on to murder somebody else. Which, that whole thing, man, him being so young, murdering his parents, being reformed, being released, and then murdering again, man, it gives me such Edmund Kemper vibes, which I'm sure we all know who that is, but he was a serial killer, and he's actually one of the few serial killers that I want to cover on my channel, that I've wanted to cover for a long time, and I just haven't done it yet. Maybe I will one day. Let me know if you guys are interested in that, but it reminds me of that so much. It's just one of those situations that seems to be avoidable, right? Because he clearly had something in him. And his stepsisters say that they sort of blamed the state for Lori's death and said specifically of this, quote, "The violence that happens in the state and across the nation has no age limit. The courts shouldn't be bound by a state law that says children less than 14 can't be tried as adults. This case is living proof. If Ennis would have received punishment he deserved when he murdered two people at 12 years old, Lorie Ann wouldn't have lost her life at the hands of this evil person. The state of Alabama must change their laws." They said they don't think it should be age specific, but instead be based on the totality of the circumstances because, all children mature differently, have different life experiences, levels of education, and that it should be based on like a case by case basis. But I don't know, man, because with things, I don't know what I think, because with things like Miller versus Alabama, for example, I think that youthful offenders are going to be getting more protections, not less. But let me know what you guys think of all that. Do you think that it should be that a young child should be tried as an adult? I think probably that what it should be a case-by-case basis, but maybe don't try children as adults. Maybe just have harsher punishments that can be given to children, but still considerations for kids, because, you know, we do know so much more about how the brain develops now. It is a big time gray area. But that's how his family feels. That's how his murder victim's family feels. And they just say that they pray for Lori's family every day. Many people pray and care for Lori's family, including the investigators that helped solve Lori's murder and the prosecution that was able to put him away without a body. She really hopes that one day Lori's body will be found so that Arlene can give her daughter a proper burial. But when the prosecutor, was asked if she thinks Rick Ennis will ever admit to where the body is, she said she couldn't really speak for him, but she believes that based on his personality, he's not the type of person who will ever talk. But she did say, quote, "Lorie is in heaven, and I know that, and that's all that matters to me." And with that, my friends, is the story of the horrible murder of Lori Slesinski. I hope you found my telling of this 2 parts to be informative. I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Lori with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. I had a couple. These are those questions. What do you believe happened to Lori that day? Like, what do you think he did to her? Do you think he's responsible? I mean, I think he has to be. I guess it's possible that framings happen. It seems unlikely to me that police got tunnel vision and went after him when he wasn't responsible, because, man, would he have to be the unluckiest guy in the world if he didn't do this? Like, Scott Peterson level of unlucky. And I'm not saying I don't think Scott Peterson did it, but I've always said that, like, if he didn't, he's the most unlucky guy in the world. And the same would go for Rick Ennis in this case. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm just kind of curious. I feel like this is the type of case that could bring on a lot of opinions. Anyways, guys, before you leave, don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases. Whenever you leave a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give it a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, and put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack. And one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.